The Time-Looping Exes by Real to Real Love, Chapter 1. The cilantro root surrendered to the flat of Rin's blade with a dull, percussive thud. Its clean, earthy scent rose from the teak board, a familiar ghost in the pre-dawn hush of Bonsuet's kitchen. This was her sanctuary, a temple of polished steel and disciplined spice jars, each label facing precisely forward. Here she wasn't merely a chef, she was an archivist, the last guardian of flavors that had defined her family for a century. Today, however, an unwelcome rhythm pulsed beneath the calm. It was a low thrum of anxiety that tightened the back of her neck, a note as offensive as a jar of instant curry powder in her pantry. Tonight was their 3rd anniversary. More importantly, tonight was Chachai Sayalim. She pictured his face, his owlish glasses, the way his pen was rumored to build dynasties or shatter them. His validation, a glowing review in Bangkok Table, was more than just business. It would be proof that tradition was perfection and that her control was absolute. She swept the pounded cilantro, white peppercorn, and garlic into a porcelain bowl. Her movements were brutally economical, each grain of salt a carefully weighed prayer. This was cooking as an act of devotion, disciplined, respectful, an art of millimeters and memory. It was everything Khem's cooking was not. Rin's jaw clenched. The mere thought of Khem summoned the specter of chaos, of foams and fusions, of blowtorches used on sacred proteins. She could still feel the heat of their last argument, over the shredding of a mango, of all things, rise in her cheeks. Her phone vibrated against the steel prep table, a shrill, modern intrusion. Khem's name flashed on the screen, framed by a silly, smiling emoji that Rin once found endearing. Tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder, she began to julienne a kaffir lime leaf, the rhythm of the blade a shield against the coming disruption. "Rin! Happy anniversary, my love!" Khem's voice was a burst of pure sunshine, too bright for the kitchen's hushed reverence. "I was thinking, forget the reservation. Let's just go. Jump on the scooter, find some smoky boat noodle stall by the river, and just be." Rin's knife froze mid-slice. The suggestion landed like a physical blow. The noise, the grime, the sheer anarchic lack of a plan. Her breath hitched. "Khem, we've discussed this. Chachai Sayalim is coming tonight. It has to be perfect." The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. When Khem spoke again, the sunshine in her voice was gone, replaced by a weary resignation that always cut Rin deeper than anger. "Right, the critic. Another perfectly controlled performance. Is there any room for us in all that perfection, Rin?" Before Rin could assemble a response that was both honest and conciliatory, a task that now felt like squaring a circle, Khem let out a soft sigh. The sound to Rin felt like the last bit of air deflating from their relationship. "I have to go. Prep. I'll see you at 8. Try to remember it's our anniversary, not just an inspection." The line went dead. The silence that rushed back in was heavier now. The scent of cilantro and lime suddenly felt sharp and acrid. Rin stared at the perfectly sliced ribbons of green on her board, her knuckles white around the knife. A sudden, chilling certainty pierced through her meticulously constructed control. She was building the perfect evening, with the perfect ingredients and the perfect technique to celebrate the perfect end of everything. Chapter 2. 8 o'clock bled into past, the low hum of conversation, the delicate music of silver on porcelain. It was the symphony Rin had conducted 1,000 times, but tonight every note felt off-key. Every table was full, every waiter moved with a silent, practiced grace. In the corner, Chachai Salim dabbed his lips, his expression revealing nothing. Rin watched for a flicker of pleasure in his eyes, a subtle nod, anything, but found only a placid void. The perfect room, the perfect food, the perfect guest list. and opposite her, the gaping wound of an empty chair. Then the carved teak doors swung open, and Khem arrived like a monsoon. She was a riot of shocking magenta in a room of muted silks. The suit's modern architectural lines were a deliberate slash against the restaurant's classical elegance. A hush rippled outwards from the door as heads turned. Khem's smile was a dazzling, unapologetic apology. "Traffic," she mouthed, sliding into her seat. She pushed a sleek silver box across the table. "Happy anniversary." Rin's fingers felt stiff, clumsy as she opened it. Inside, nestled in black foam, lay gleaming alien instruments: a sous vide circulator, an induction syringe, a foam whipper. They looked like surgical tools for a future she refused to inhabit. A profound, icy cold seized Rin's chest. This wasn't a gift, it was a manifesto. "You think this is a joke," Rin whispered, her voice dangerously low, as she felt the eyes of the adjacent table on them. "I think it's a bridge," Khem countered, her voice tight, "between the 19th century and this one." Before the argument could ignite, Rin's headwaiter, Prasert, materialized at her elbow, his face ashen. He held the phone discreetly below the table, the screen glowing with Kitty. "Kun Rin, the Bangkok table review. It's live." Rin snatched the phone. Her eyes flew across the text, past the hollow praise for flawless technique and historical accuracy, searching for the verdict. And then she saw it, the one word that mattered: passionless. The word sucked the air out of her lungs. It detonated the last of her restraint, and the carefully orchestrated room dissolved into a dull roar in her ears. There was only Khem, her vibrant suit a mocking, screaming symbol of the very thing Rin had just been told she lacked. "This is your fault," Rin hissed, the sound slicing through the chatter. Khem flinched back, her face flushing. "My fault? I think you're hiding in this place," she shot back, her voice rising. "You're so terrified of feeling a single messy thing that you've forgotten how to create. You just repeat." The accusation landed with the force of a slap. A sharp intake of breath was all Rin could manage before her own fury erupted. "I honor tradition, something you know nothing about." "I honor life, Rin. Food is meant to be alive." She threw her hands up, the gesture so large it seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen from the room. She pushed her chair back, the screech of its legs against the floor, a sound of finality. The entire restaurant was silent now, a sea of frozen faces. Khem's eyes, bright with unshed tears, locked with hers. The fight seemed to drain out of her in an instant, leaving behind a devastating quiet. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice cracking. "We're done." She turned and walked out, a disappearing slash of magenta. Rin was left standing alone, a statue in the center of her own perfect, and now publicly certified, passionless world. Chapter 3. A jaunty Thai folk song chirped from the bedside table. Rin's eyes shot open. The morning light was a familiar, soft gray. She sat bolt upright, a gasp catching in her throat, as the dregs of a nightmare clung to her. The sting of public humiliation, the hollow echo of Khem's final words. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat thudding in frantic time with the alarm's cheerful melody. It was just a dream, a horrible, vivid dream. Her hand reached for the phone, then froze inches from the screen. A paralyzing cold, sharp and specific, locked her joints. The date was glowing, stark and undeniable. The morning of her anniversary. Nausea rose in her throat. A glitch, a mistake. It had to be. She stumbled out of bed, her movements jerky. In her apartment kitchen, the cutting board was clean. The evidence of her grief, the half-empty wine bottle, the tear-stiffened napkin, was gone, wiped from existence. A sliver of hope, insane and desperate, warred with the dread icing her veins. But at Bon Sue, the nightmare was laid out for her. The cilantro root, the white peppercorns, the garlic, all waiting on her prep station, an exact replica. The day became a script she was forced to perform from within a thick fog. The weight of the knife in her hand felt alien. The rhythmic pounding of the mortar and pestle became a maddening countdown. When her phone buzzed, the vibration was a physical shock. Khem's name, the silly emoji. She answered, her own voice a stranger's. "Rin, happy anniversary, my love." The recorded brightness of Khem's voice was a fresh torture. Rin recited her lines, the words tasting like ash. The conversation played out, a perfect, painful echo. Khem's disappointed sigh landed like a physical blow for the second time. The evening arrived, a tidal wave she couldn't outrun. The magenta suit, the silver box, Precert's pitying eyes, passionless. The word was a branding iron. The fight was a volcano. Khem's exit was a gunshot. She stumbled home and collapsed. The jaunty folk song chirped. Rin's eyes snapped open. She didn't have to look, she could feel it in the air, in the sick, stagnant quality of the light. A certainty sank its teeth into her soul. Slowly, mechanically, she turned her head. The phone, the same date, the same day. The first time was a nightmare. The second time was a horrifying coincidence. The third time was a prison. A raw, guttural sob ripped from her throat. She was trapped, chained to the worst day of her life, forced to watch her own failure on a permanent repeating loop. The humiliation, the heartbreak, it was no longer a memory. It was the very air she breathed. And at the center of it all was Khem. Khem with her chaotic energy, her magenta suit, her devastatingly beautiful smile. The sob cut off, abruptly. Her breath hitched. The despair didn't vanish, but it crystallized, hardening from a helpless fog into a shard of ice. Her hands clenched into fists in the sheets. The universe wasn't her jailer. The universe was abstract. Khem was real. Khem was the key. Her mind, once screaming, went silent and cold. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't a spectacle to be endured anymore. It was a problem to be solved. And she would start with the source. This time, she would be waiting.
Chapter 4. On the fourth morning, the jaunty folk song was not a herald of despair, but a declaration of war. Rin didn't sob. She swung her legs out of bed with a cold, clear purpose. She knew the catalyst. Her name was Khem. Before Khem could call, before she could utter a single word about boat noodles, Rin dialed. "Don't bother coming tonight," Rin said, her voice a flat, sterile instrument. "It's over." She ended the call before a response could form, the click of the phone a clinical, final sound. The day was a long, hollow wait, but the loop was a stubborn beast. That evening, a courier arrived with a single white orchid and a note in Khem's defiant script. "You can't break up with me if I don't accept." The review still landed. The failure was just as potent. The folk song chirped. Morning 5. Her phone rang the instant the Alonga died. She answered. "Good morning, sunshine," Khem's voice said. The usual cheer had been stripped away, leaving something wary and laced with disbelief. "So you're in it too." She knows she yelled. You can feel what she's doing. "It's funny! It's so good!" "Looks like that," Khem's voice crackled back. "So what's the plan, Warden? How do we get out of your perfectly structured prison?" "On day 6, Rin answered. She waited by the door, a glass of Bordeaux like a dark jewel in her hand. When Khem swept in, the magenta of her suit an assault on the senses, Rin tripped. The red wine cascaded down Khem's front. "Oh, clumsy me," Rin purred. On day 7, Khem was ready. She arrived in pristine, tactical white, a glass of champagne held aloft. Dodging Rin's clumsy advance with a dancer's grace, she faked her own stumble, dousing Rin's silk dress. "Twinsies!" Khem chirped, her eyes flashing. The battle moved to the kitchen. Under the guise of a truce, Khem swept past the prep line with a dazzling smile. It was only when Chai Salem took a bite of his gang dang, his face turning a shade of crimson that matched yesterday's suit, that Rin understood. As the critic choked and sputtered, Rin saw it. Khem had weaponized a ghost pepper infusion. The kitchen descended into chaos. "Why?" Rin shrieked over the smoke and the frantic movements of her staff. "Why do you have to destroy everything important to me?" Khem, cornered and furious, her face flushed, yelled back, her voice cracking with a pain that sliced through the rage. "Because you never let me be a part of it." The words hit Rin with the force of a physical blow. The noise of the kitchen, the critic's gasps, her own anger, it all warped and bent into a singular piercing sound. Then the world dissolved. The jaunty folk song chirped. Morning 8. Rin lay motionless, the familiar hot coal of anger burning in her chest. But Khem's words were a persistent echo in the quiet room, chipping away at the foundation of her fury. "Because you never let me be a part of it." She had seen the sabotage as a war to be won, but the spilled wine, the ghost pepper, what if it was just a new, more elaborate way of having the same old fight? A desperate, destructive plea to be seen. The sabotage wasn't working. It was time for a new strategy. Chapter 5. On the 10th morning, the folk song was just noise. Rin had exhausted anger and outmaneuvered sabotage, leaving only a hollowed-out exhaustion. She stared at the ceiling, tracing the familiar cracks, a map of her own fracturing psyche. The day was a cage, and she could feel the phantom ache of bruised knuckles from rattling its bars. A new thought, quiet and radical, took root in the quiet. What if you stopped fighting the cage and just opened the door? Before the dread could take hold, her thumb was hovering over Khem's name. She pressed call. "Let me guess," Khem's exhausted voice answered. "You've replaced the sugar with salt." "No," Rin said, the word feeling foreign on her tongue as she swung her legs out of bed. "I'm not going to the restaurant today." The silence on the other end was absolute, a void of pure static. Rin could picture Khem sitting bolt upright, brow furrowed. "Is this a trick?" "It's our anniversary," Rin said, echoing Khem's words from a lifetime ago. "You were right. Let's just go." The silence that followed wasn't angry or strategic. It was the sound of a held breath, of a world tilting on its axis. They met at the entrance to the Chatuchak market. The air was a thick soup of sizzling pork, jasmine, and diesel fumes, a direct assault on Bon Sui's curated tranquility. For the first hour, the truce held, fragile as spun sugar. They moved through the labyrinthine stalls, the unspoken reality of the looping day, a chasm between them. Then Khem bought them grilled squid on a stick, dripping with a fiery sauce. She held one out to Rin. The old Rin would have recoiled, insisted on a plate. This Rin simply took it. When a drop of sauce landed on her hand, she licked it off without thinking. The sweet, spicy tang a shock to her system. Across from her, Khem watched, a small, curious smile forming. They ate with a recklessness born of consequence-free living. At a boat noodle stall Ren knew from her blog, she felt a thrill of terror as she added extra chili flakes, their elbows bumping in the cramped space. She was a woman without a plan, eating on a plastic stool, and the feeling was dangerously close to freedom. They devoured mango sticky rice, and when Khem laughed at a smudge of coconut cream on Rin's nose, she didn't flush with embarrassment, she laughed too. As dusk tinted the sky a bruised purple, they found themselves on a quiet pier overlooking the Chao Phraya River. "I was always intimidated by you," Khem said softly, watching a barge move down the water. "The restaurant, your family, it was all this perfect porcelain thing. I felt like if I even breathed on it, it would break. So I just built my own world with my own noisy, crazy things." Ren watched the murky water, Khem's confession settling a weight in her heart. She thought of the silent kitchen, the crushing pressure to be flawless.
I envied you, Rin admitted, the words tasting like rust and relief. I was always so afraid of being too much. I met Khem's gaze, saw her own vulnerability reflected there. My world isn't porcelain, Khem. It's a cage. A beautiful, well-maintained cage. They sat in the gathering dark, nothing left to fight about. The jaunty folk song chirped. Ren opened her eyes, the familiar gray light, the same ceiling. But the hollow ache in her chest was gone. In its place, she could still feel the phantom warmth of Khem's shoulder beside hers, still taste the ghost of chili sauce on her tongue. The loop wasn't broken, but something had shifted. The cage was still there, but for the first time, she felt like she might have found the key, and she knew she couldn't turn it alone.
Chapter 6. The jaunty folk song became their starting pistol. By day 15, they had a new routine. No surrender, just a project. They met at Khem's apartment, a space that smelled of coffee and toasted chili. Sketches of impossible dishes were tacked to the walls next to ancient poetry. Rin, whose own home was a shrine to order, found herself unconsciously unclenching her jaw the moment she stepped inside. Today, the mission was a forensic deep dive. A large whiteboard, procured from a defunct startup, dominated the living room. "Okay," Khem said, uncapping a blue marker. "Let's map the disaster." They built a timeline, a stark autopsy of their worst day. They dissected the fight, pinning each accusation to the board like a failed specimen, until the words themselves blurred into mere sounds of hurt. Yet, after 2 full loops of this, the answer remained elusive. "We're looking at the symptoms," Rin said on the morning of day 18, her eyes raw from staring at the board. "Not the cause. What were you doing that morning, before the restaurant?" Khem stopped pacing. She chewed on her lower lip, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Working, messing around on my phone." "Specifically," Rin pressed, sensing the evasion. Khem let out a long breath and sank onto the sofa. She pulled out her phone, her fingers tapping for a moment before she turned it around. The screen burned with a clean, minimalist webpage. At the top, in an elegant script, "Bangkok bites." The air rushed out of Rin's lungs. The world tilted. It felt like being caught naked under a spotlight, every secret fear and hidden passion laid bare. Her blog, her secret world, in Khem's hand. "You found it," she whispered, her voice hollow. "That morning," Khem confirmed quietly, "and I was so excited because I saw you. Not Chef Apiwat, the guardian of a legacy, but Rin, the woman who gets that ridiculously happy look on her face when she eats something truly delicious. The woman I fell in love with." Rin could only stare, the gears of her mind grinding to a halt. So the gift, the gadgets, were for her, Khem pleaded, her eyes shining. "For the blogger, the woman who loves flavor in all its forms. I thought we could build a bridge between our worlds, between Bon Swai and Bangkok Bites. It wasn't a criticism, Rin." Her voice dropped, aching with the hurt that mirrored Rin's own. "It was an invitation." An invitation. The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of Rin's mind. It wasn't an insult. The modernist tools weren't a judgment on her tradition. They were a key to a door she didn't know Khem had opened. Khem hadn't discovered her secret to expose a weakness, but because she saw it as a strength. The entire foundation of her anger, of her righteous, looping humiliation, crumbled into dust. She had been standing guard for a fortress, ready to fight to the death, while the person she loved was just outside holding flowers. Her movements stiff, as if wading through a new, heavier atmosphere, she walked to the whiteboard. She picked up the eraser. The squeak it made as it wiped away the angry, desperate letters of escape was the only sound in the room. She uncapped the black marker. In the empty space, she wrote a single new word: understand. She stepped back, looking at it. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a promise of freedom. It was just a new purpose. The loop wasn't a prison. It was a classroom. And for the first time, she was ready to learn the lesson.
Chapter 7. Day 20 began not with a jolt of anxiety, but with a quiet sense of purpose. The jaunty folk song was now the opening bell for the day's lab session. Rin didn't call Khem. She simply went to her own kitchen at Bon Sui, unlocked the doors, and in the pre-dawn quiet, she waited. Khem arrived an hour later. She carried the silver box, placing it on the pristine steel prep table not as a challenge, but as an offering. "So," Khem said, her eyes sweeping across the immaculate kitchen, "where do we begin?" Rin gestured to a bowl of foundational massaman spices. "Here," she said, "with tradition." For the first time, the kitchen at Bon Sui became a sandbox instead of a temple. As Rin worked the mortar and pestle, explaining the delicate balance of her great-grandmother's recipe, Khem listened. She truly listened. Then she picked up a piece of lamb. "And what if," Khem proposed, holding up the sous vide circulator, "what if we cook this lamb so precisely that it doesn't just surrender to the spices, it honors them?" A week ago, Ren would have called it heresy. Today, she just nodded. A new dance began, a fusion of two opposing rhythms finding a shared tempo. They moved around each other in the space that was once a battlefield, their near collisions evolving into an effortless choreography. Rin's ancestral knowledge was the anchor. Khem's scientific curiosity was the sail. Their hands brushed, reaching for the same jar of palm sugar, a jolt of static electricity passing between them. A shared laugh erupted when a foam Khem was creating expanded too quickly, leaving a familiar dollop of coconut cream on her nose. The result, served in a single bowl as afternoon light streamed into the empty restaurant, was breathtaking. It was a perfect massaman curry transformed. The lamb, impossibly tender, melted on the tongue. The sauce, rich with Rin's ancestral spices, was now a fragrant ethereal foam. It was Bon Sui's soul with Khem's fire. It was a bridge on a plate. They ate in a comfortable silence, the dish a testament to everything they couldn't yet say. "When you said I was hiding in a museum," Ren began, breaking the quiet, "you weren't wrong. I was terrified my grandmother's ghost would smite me with a coconut grater if I changed a single thing." Khem smiled. "And when I gave you the gadgets," she admitted, "I wasn't trying to erase her. I was trying to find you, the brilliant, passionate food nerd hiding under the chef's uniform." The folk song would chirp, and the next day they would do it again. They dismantled their apocalyptic fight, line by painful line, replacing accusations with confessions of fear. Each reset built upon the last, laying down a new foundation of trust. It was on one of these evenings, watching Khem demonstrate how to inject a hint of kaifir lime into a scallop, that it happened. Rin found herself mesmerized, not by the technique, but by the intense, joyful focus in Khem's eyes. A familiar warmth, one she had tried so hard to bury under layers of anger and resentment, sparked to life in her chest. It was bright and sudden and impossible to ignore. It was the undeniable chemistry that had started this whole mess in the first place, and she felt it rising again, a dangerous and beautiful tide. The day could be erased, but this feeling, she knew with a terrifying certainty, could not. Chapter 8. Day 30 was supposed to be the one. They moved with a synchronized grace born of shared memory, their kitchen a stage where they were flawless. It was no longer a collaboration. It was a singular, unified expression of their shared soul. Khem arrived on time, her magenta suit a confident splash of joy. The silver box was already in the kitchen, its contents integrated into their masterpiece. Chachai Salem sat in his usual corner, but when he took a bite of their curry, he put down his fork. He closed his eyes. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He didn't just write a review, he wrote a love letter. They saw the draft before it posted. The final word was not passionless. It was transcendent. Later, sitting in the quiet restaurant long after the last patron had gone, the air warm with the lingering scent of spices and contentment, Rin reached across the table. Her fingers laced through Khem's. "I'm not scared anymore," she confessed. "Of tomorrow." "I know," Khem whispered, her eyes glistening in the candlelight. "All I ever wanted was for you to see me." They went to Rin's apartment, and for the first time in this repeating eternity, she fell asleep not in a state of dread, but wrapped in Khem's arms, her heart full of a quiet, certain hope. The jaunty folk song chirped. For a blissful moment, Rin's mind registered it as a phantom echo. She was safe. The warmth of Khem's body was a comforting weight beside her, the memory of her soft breathing a steady rhythm against her back. It was over. But the song didn't stop. The phantom warmth vanished, replaced by a draft of cold air on her skin. Her eyes flew open. The light was wrong, the familiar, oppressive gray of the day. The space beside her was empty. She had never been there. A sound, raw and wounded, tore from Rin's throat. It was the sound of hope dying. She snatched the phone, her hands shaking so violently the screen blurred. The date glowed with merciless indifference. They had achieved perfection. They had healed, and it meant nothing. It wasn't a test. It was a sentence. Her phone rang. Khem. Rin answered, her throat too tight to speak. "Rin?" Khem's voice was a hollowed-out whisper. She knew. "It didn't work," Rin breathed, the words tasting like ash. The next few loops were a descent into a shared abyss. On day 31, neither got out of bed. On day 32, they sat on a park bench for hours. The silence was a tangible weight between them. On day 33, they allowed the original day to unfold. They were puppets moving through a hated script. The fight erupted, their voices flat, their gestures heavy. They were spectators at their own execution. As Khem walked out, for the 33rd time, leaving Rin alone in the silent restaurant, a thought took hold, cold and sharp as glass. Perhaps the loop's true punishment wasn't reliving their worst day. Perhaps it was the trick of letting them build a better one, only to smash it before their eyes, over and over and over. Chapter 9. On the morning of day 37, the jaunty folk song washed over Rin. The despair had burned itself out, leaving behind a strange, quiet clarity. She thought of their attempts, control, sabotage, even perfection, and she saw the flaw. They had been trying to pass a test, but Khem, laughing with a smudge of flour on her cheek, had never been a test. The chaotic, joyful symphony of the street market had never been a test. Their mistake wasn't in the execution, it was in the goal. They had been trying to build a perfect cage, when what they needed was to learn how to be free. With a resolve that felt like a deep, calming breath, Rin picked up the phone. "I have an idea," she said, her voice steady, "and it has nothing to do with being perfect." That afternoon, Rin gathered her kitchen staff. Khem stood beside her, not as a guest, but as a partner. "Tonight," Rin announced, her voice resonating with an authority that came from surrender, not control, "the menu changes. Chef Khem and I will be creating it together, as we go. There is no plan. There is only what feels right." A collective gasp rippled through the staff. Persert looked as though he might faint. This was not the Rin they knew. This was chaos invited through the front door. And to Rin, it felt like victory. The service was a beautiful, joyful storm. The air, once tense with precision, now rang with laughter and the sizzle of spontaneous creation. Rin abandoned her recipes, calling for spices by instinct. Khem tempered her wilder impulses, using her techniques to elevate, not deconstruct. It was an effortless conversation held in the language of food. When the last plate was cleared, they were left alone in the quiet aftermath, the air thick with the scent of chili, lime, and success. Rin said, "I was so afraid, terrified that if I let you in, your light would expose all the cracks in my foundation, that everyone would see I wasn't perfect, just scared. And I was afraid," Khem confessed, her voice thick, "that my noise would always be too loud for your quiet, that I could never truly belong in your world." Rin took a deep breath, the air itself feeling new. She walked over to Khem and took her hands. They were warm and dusted with flour. "Let's break up," Rin said softly. Khem's eyes widened, a flicker of the old hurt surfacing. "No," Rin clarified, her grip tightening. "Let's break up with the people we were too scared to be. The woman who hides in her kitchen and the woman who's afraid she's too loud. They don't work together." A wave of understanding washed over Khem's face, melting the hurt into a slow, brilliant smile. This was the answer, not perfection. Honesty. She leaned in and Rin met her halfway. The kiss was not the desperate, hopeful kiss from the night of their perfect failure. It was an exhale, a quiet, certain, and profound agreement, an ending and a beginning, all at once. In that moment, suspended in the quiet hum of the kitchen, neither of them knew if the loop would break, and for the first time, neither of them cared. They had already found what they were looking for.
Chapter 10. Rin awoke to a strange and profound presence. Silence. It was not an absence of noise, but a deep and peaceful quiet that filled the room, chasing away the ghost of the jaunty folk song she realized she'd been bracing for. She lay perfectly still, her heart a soft, cautious drum. She did not dare to hope. Hope was the bait the loop had used to shatter her on day 30. For a long moment, she just breathed, suspended between a nightmare ending and a dream beginning. Finally, with a will that felt forged in fire, she forced her arm to move. She reached for the phone, her breath burning in her lungs. She turned the screen toward her face. A new date. A tomorrow. A single, silent tear escaped and traced a path through the faint dusting of flowers still on her cheek. "It's over." The screen lit up with an incoming message. Her breath fitched. "Khem. Hungry? There's a boat noodle stall on Phra Atit Road that a certain anonymous blogger once gave 5 stars. Meet me there?" A laugh, bright and liberating, bubbled up from Rin's chest. She typed back a single word. "Always." The new normal arrived not all at once, but in a series of beautiful, chaotic moments. It was the sight of Khem's tamarind foam served alongside Rin's classic green curry at Bon Sui. It was the sound of Chat Chai Slalim, now a regular fan, laughing with delight. It was the look of their rebranded blog, Bangkok Bites, a chef's dialogue, featuring Rin's prose next to Khem's stunning photos. It was the feeling of their follower count skyrocketing as they became not just reviewers, but curators of the city's culinary soul. The final scene finds them seated on tiny plastic stools at that same riverside stall, the air steamy with the vapor of boiling broth and the roar of long-tail boats. A bowl of noodles sits between them. Their hands are intertwined over the worn table, a comfortable, unthinking gesture. Khem gestures with her chopsticks. "You know, a touch of tamarind foam would really elevate this."
Rin smiles, a real, unguarded smile that reaches her eyes. And I think you should respect the 80 years of tradition in that bowl. She takes a bite, savoring the perfect familiar flavor. But maybe, she adds, her eyes twinkling, we can try it at home. Khem's answering laugh is the brightest thing on a street full of color. Rin leans her head against Khem's shoulder, watching the beautiful, chaotic dance of the city. She thought of the woman she had been, the one who equated control with happiness and saw chaos as the enemy. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who had finally found her truest joy, not in a flawless recipe, but in the warm, unpredictable space between two hands, clasped together over a simple bowl of noodles.